NATO has to be able to operate on the sea, over the sea, and also under the sea.
If you were an old historian, you'd say maritime power is huge warships giving influence, gunboat diplomacy and all the rest of that. I see it now as very different.
We have a real enemy and a real aggressor.
All nations' navies are the epitome of a nation's capability and resolve for conflict prevention. And the NATO Rapid Reaction Force, I think, describes that conflict prevention.
Merchant vessel Pollux, this is NATO warship Foxtrot 220 calling you channel 16, over. We're part of a task group of 5 or 6 different ships, and we've all been given an area to search and patrol for terrorist activity and any other suspicious goings on in the area. So we'll close the contact to within 5 nautical miles, and once we have it visually, we can determine how it compares to its AIS status. So if it says it's 150 metres and it's quite clearly 300, we know that there's a discrepancy there.
The whole region of the Mediterranean has changed last year with all the Arab Spring movements, the instability coming from the Middle East. That adds up to several factors contributing to the increased risk in the situation, in the security environment within the Med.
NATO can help in a lot of ways. Firstly, in terms of resources, in terms of bringing ships to the Aegean, and also just having a presence there is in itself a disincentive for smugglers. There has to be real-time information exchange between the two operations, because you have a Frontex operation Poseidon, which is already in place operating in Greek waters. And the big advantage about the NATO operation is that it can operate in Turkish waters, which is something that Frontex can't do.
When I see some people who is very desperate and who is in pain, it pains me very much, and also I am very proud of, as a commander of the ship, to support the people and to reduce the number of loss of life at sea.
If you think in the Mediterranean, there are 900 organisations that are building a maritime picture. All of them, for one reason or another, are keeping it to themselves rather than sharing it. Now, if I can get them to share 5% of their information and intelligence, and each one of them does it, and I turn it around and make sense of it using my team here properly, and then sell it back to NATO, NATO will have a massively different picture than they've ever had before. I suddenly start to get a bit of a 360 view that is helpful for everybody.
NATO, quite frankly, has been focused on Afghanistan, rightly so, for the last decade or so, and we've now got to restore a broader contingent capability within NATO.
Eight years ago, we allowed the maritime, along with many other parts of NATO, to stultify a little bit, to get a little bit lost in what we were doing. And of course, there was not a threat perceived, and that has changed, sadly, with the world situation. But what we are starting to see is that there needs to be components of the maritime, like land and air, who really can react quite quickly, need to break free of NATO process and procedures to change the way they're doing business. What people don't realise is for the first time ever I actually moved 2 task groups. I didn't ask permission, I just moved them so that we were ready to respond if political decision makers needed to go an extra step.
Warships can travel upwards 360 miles in a day, perhaps more than that. But when we're there, we're almost immediately ready if we understand the environment. We're at high readiness, but we draw upon allied nations' ships to respond to a time of crisis, whether it was an Article 5 or other one. So that's what the NATO response force is. In the maritime, it involves ships, it involves aircraft, it involves submarines, it involves amphibious capabilities, and it works alongside the land and air components.
I mean, first and foremost, it's a huge privilege for Ocean, the Royal Navy, to be the flagship for NATO for 2016. It was a vast amount of training last year, and we're at high readiness throughout the year for that. And it means we've got to be ready for whatever may happen. And as you know, the world's an uncertain place at the moment, and we need to be ready to move wherever NATO may want us to go and to take charge of what happens. And that could be anything from a high-end warfighting environment down to disaster relief, humanitarian operations. And part of my job as the commanding officer is to make sure the ship's company are ready to do that. And by that I mean the ability to put armed forces across the beach by a combination of either surface craft or aviation, and we can tailor that exactly on the operation.
An amphibious operation can be done in 2 different ways. One via surface or the other via air. If you have more than one ship, even within the United States Navy, the communications just between those 2 ships can be challenging. Now add a different service and then add a 3rd ship. Now add 14 or 15 different countries, and now we're combined. That is itself extremely complex, challenging, but the training we gain by doing this is extremely valuable.
What does NATO offer us? It offers us some really effective high-end warfighting training. It offers us the opportunity to work alongside our NATO allies, who will be the people that we work with in times of tension and war, understand how they work so that we can work more effectively and efficiently together. And it also offers us an opportunity to understand the environment where we're most likely to operate in times of war. It is unfortunate that over the last few years we have seen an emerging rather than a receding threat from a very capable armed force within Russia. So one of the areas where it is critical that we as a Royal Navy, as part of NATO alongside our allies, train together, is to be able to respond, to provide reassurance to those nations that are closest to Russia. Our prosperity and security is dependent upon global trade and the access to the oceans and those maritime agreements that allow access to those oceans.
It's not only about economics. For us, first of all, energy security is about politics. It's about enhancement of our transformation from one political system to another, that nobody could manipulate or abuse dependency and to try to kind of ruin our political system, because this is not about energy. First of all, this is about political stability, about democracy, and the stronger we are economically, the stronger we are politically.
Bolt-Tops is a major exercise in a part of the world that we're really concerned about. The exercise is demanding, but the exercise will come out having trained up a range of different navies in a way that they haven't enjoyed for some time.
In order to see how important it is, just look at the map. You can see the Black Sea is bordered by allies, by partners, and the Black Sea is connected to the Mediterranean, which is connected to the wider ocean and waterways. So that's the reason Black Sea remains crucial for NATO, and we want to make sure to be here in the Black Sea whenever it's possible with our standing naval groups.
Turkey, Romania, Bulgaria, Georgia and Ukraine all have a very good picture of what's happening in the Black Sea. Is the Black Sea a war zone? No, of course it's not. But it worries us because we don't understand Russian behaviour amongst everything else.
Georgia, a NATO partner, has no dedicated navy and relies on a small coast guard to protect its coastlines. 20% of its territory has been occupied by Russia since 2008.
Georgia is a littoral country. We have sea, and it means that we have threat from sea also. After occupation of Crimea, this military and military-political balance in Black Sea absolutely changed. Black Sea countries need additional and other kind of security measures and security formats. And I think that in that case, Georgia can play quite significant role for this security format.
Of course, Russia springs to our own attention because it's a very close neighbour of NATO. It's not the only one. There are many others, above all ranging eastward, if you want. They're all investing heavily into modern and capable maritime maritime assets.
In unmanned vehicles, robotics, sensor networks can be applied to deliver new capabilities that were impossible before, or to do traditional missions in ways that are less expensive or less risky. And that's where CMRE plays a role, in our engagement with the research community, in creating platforms which are interoperable, can do different missions, and can communicate even underwater.
So, Rechtsmeister, was geht?
Maritime capabilities, if you just compare with land, sometimes even air, their own characteristic is every investment is a very long-term investment. So you cannot just make it happen in months when the necessity arises. You have to be ready years in advance with the planning, with the right capabilities at sea, and you have to have the right mix of them.
Theatre anti-submarine warfare and anti-submarine warfare in the round is one I think we need to polish back, and we're doing that very aggressively. There are new weapon systems and new tactics and procedures that other people are using, whether you're Russia or Daesh, which we need to get on top of and get ahead of.
So where might NATO be headed in the future?
I think the Aegean activity was a real illustration of where we may be going. There was great concern over the movement of people and going through Turkey into Greece. That was raw, hard politics and nothing to do with me. But once they made the decision, we moved a task group in 18 hours and had a task group on the ground doing its business within 24 hours. I think the threat is coming closer and closer to our backyard. When people can see film footage of Russian submarines fitted with very powerful missile systems heading down the North Sea and heading into the Mediterranean and into the Black Sea, that worries them, and it needs to worry them.
You can detect how people are happy that when this kind of ships and this kind of NATO visitors coming. It means that we continue moving right direction, and our interoperability with NATO it's become more and more deeper and wider.
What NATO has to be is relevant. We have to determine our role in that, noting that we don't own the solutions entirely militarily, but we can certainly contribute to them.